My name is Kevin Mitnick.
Kevin Mitnick hacked into the largest tech companies on the planet.
I've successfully compromised all systems that I targeted for unauthorized access except one.
Yet his greatest skill lay not in his technical ability, but in his deep understanding of human behavior, enabling him to manipulate people into doing things they wouldn't normally do. He'd walk into a building he was going to target, pretending to drop off a letter for an employee at the front desk, just so he could take a good look at the staff IDs. Then, using Photoshop, he'd forge his own ID. Kevin explained in his memoir, Ghost in the Wires, it doesn't even have to be all that authentic looking. 99% of the time, it won't get more than a glance. Wearing his fake badge, he'd follow employees back from smoke breaks through the back door, which required a security pass for access, exploiting the common courtesy of holding the door open for the person behind you. He then let in his hacking buddy, who'd access the crawl space to get inside the locked office of the company's network engineers. Once inside, he bypassed the computer's existing operating system by installing a bootable version of it, loaded with hacking tools, including malware that enabled him to access keystrokes, steal passwords, even activate the webcam. He eventually finds his way to the heart of the system, the servers responsible for handling customer transactions, and decrypts millions and millions of credit card numbers. I can make purchases all day long using a different credit card each time and never run out of numbers. Yet he never used any of the cards or any of the information he accessed. Like a kid breaking into an abandoned building, he hacked just for the fun of it. He explained, for us, the thrill lay simply in knowing we had gained the power. His obsession with exploiting the system started when he was young. At the age of 12, he found a way to ride the bus in LA for free by buying a punch card and punching blank tickets he fished out of a dumpster. Kevin spent a lot of time alone. His dad left when he was 3, and his mom often worked double shifts as a waitress at various delis in Los Angeles to support them. To pass the time, he liked to perform magic tricks, influenced by the magician dad of the girl he had a crush on. He wrote, "The notion that people enjoyed being taken in was a stunning revelation that influenced the course of my life." In high school, he became obsessed with phone phreaking, manipulating telephone networks to make free long-distance calls. He loved using technology to play pranks. He and his friend Louis Tepane would modify an amateur radio to make their voices come out of a McDonald's drive-thru speaker and say things like, "I'm sorry, we don't serve cops here." But his antics were not always so innocent. When he was 17, he targeted the critical operating system of Pacific Bell, a major telephone provider in California, later known as AT&T. Posing as an employee who wanted to show 2 friends around one night, the security guard simply said, "Sure, just sign in," without asking for ID. They walked out with piles of manuals on how the system worked. But then one of his buddy's ex-girlfriends snitched, and he spent 3 months in juvenile detention. That didn't deter him. His obsession with hacking overshadowed all else. He neglected high school, passed the GED exam, and later enrolled in a technical school in LA, where he met the woman who would later become his wife. Even when he moved in with Bonnie, he spent virtually every waking hour on his computer. One of his favorite targets was Digital Equipment Corporation, a leading computer vendor. He really wanted the source code, the recipe for how a product works, for DEC's new operating system, VMS, to identify security flaws. He and his friend, Lenny DeChico, remotely infiltrated DEC to steal the prized source code. But then Lenny betrayed him. When Lenny refused to fork over $150 after losing a bet, Kevin started calling Lenny's employer, pretending to be the IRS, and claiming Lenny was wanted for tax crimes. Lenny was so angry that he told his boss that he and Kevin were hacking into DEC late at night from the office. The FBI got involved, and Lenny started secretly recording his conversations with Kevin. When the feds arrested Kevin, Kevin said Lenny was dancing in a little circle of joy, as if he were celebrating some kind of victory over me. This hack would haunt him. Prosecutor Leon Weidman painted Kevin as a significant threat, claiming he can whistle into a telephone and launch a nuclear missile from NORAD. That might seem ridiculous now, but in the 1980s, there was a lot of fear over how technology worked. Computers and the fledgling internet were not that well understood by the general public. So the judge threw Kevin into solitary confinement, where he spent 8 months. When he was ready for release, Bonnie left him. He suspected she was cheating. After hacking into her answering machine, he discovered that she was having an affair with his best friend, Louis. Despite the betrayal, he remained friends with Lewis because there were very few people who could understand his predicament. After serving a year in prison, Kevin knew he had to tread more carefully. He needed to ensure his phone couldn't be tracked. He had to find a way of changing the electronic serial number of his Novatel PTR 825. He called Novatel and posed as one of their engineers, even calling from the noisy Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas to sound credible. He spoke with an engineering manager named Kumamoto, who revealed it was possible to change the ESN from the phone's keypad if you had a special computer chip containing a special version of the firmware. Kevin convinced Kumamoto to ship a few chips to the Las Vegas hotel where he claimed to be staying. He then called up an electronics store and obtained the ESNs of recently activated phones, allowing him to impersonate those devices on the network. Around this time, Kevin was introduced to a supposed star hacker named Eric through his half-brother's ex-girlfriend. Eric was super secretive. He wouldn't give Kevin his phone number or pager number. They communicated through an intermediary. After talking a few times, Kevin's gut told him something was off. Eric didn't talk like other hackers. He sounded more like Joe Friday, like a cop. He asked questions like, "What projects have you been up to lately? Who are you talking with these days?" He decided to dig deeper into Eric's background. Kevin's friend Dave at Pacific Bell set up a trap with a bait phone number. When Eric dialed in, the call rerouted to Dave's office, allowing them to capture Eric's phone number through the system's caller ID. Using Eric's phone number, he discovered his address. He called Pacific Bell, pretending to be a technician named Terry. When asked for a tech code, Kevin provided a random number. He recalled, "I knew she wasn't going to look it up. They never did. Any 3-digit number would satisfy, so long as I sounded confident and didn't hesitate." Upon requesting the address linked to Eric's phone number, the employee didn't bat an eye. 3636 South Sepulveda, Unit 107B, registered under the name Joseph Wernel. Kevin's doubts deepened when he accessed Eric's call logs and found calls to the Los Angeles headquarters of the FBI. Driven to unravel the full story, Kevin devised an elaborate scheme to obtain Eric's social security number. He posed as a member of the Office of the Inspector General at the Social Security Administration, responsible for investigating fraud. To gain credibility, he meticulously researched the agency's internal structure, the names of supervisors and managers, and even learned the company lingo, including terms like mods, short for modules, referring to teams handling claims. A staff member named Ann ate up his lies and gave him anything he wanted: social security numbers, birth dates, benefits, earnings. Ann's information about an Eric Hines Sr., likely Eric's father, led to a shocking discovery. When Kevin called Eric Hines Sr. and said, "I'm trying to get a hold of Eric. I'm a friend of his from high school," Eric Hines Sr. sounded annoyed and replied, "My son died as an infant." Who really was the person masquerading as Eric Hines Jr.? Kevin remembered Eric bragging about collaborating with hacker Kevin Poulsen. He dug around and found an article about Poulsen conspiring with 2 others to rig radio contests. He recognized the name of one of the co-conspirators, but wasn't familiar with the other, Justin Tanner Peterson. When he manipulated the Department of Motor Vehicles to read in Peterson's physical description, it was a match for Eric. Justin Tanner Peterson was a hacker working as an FBI informant to save his own ass, in Kevin's words. The identity Joseph Wernel listed on the apartment was the made-up identity of an FBI agent named Joseph Ways. Meanwhile, security at Pacific Bell had begun wiretapping calls from his father's house. In a lapse of judgment, Kevin had used his dad's landline while staying there temporarily instead of his untraceable cell phone. As the FBI pursued Kevin, he was also pursuing them. He figured out the names and numbers of the FBI agents Eric was talking to. And upon learning that the agents used the cell provider Pactel in Los Angeles, Kevin infiltrated Pactel's system to track their call records and pinpoint their locations. He also installed a scanner in his office at the private investigation firm where he worked to detect FBI cell phones, using software programmed with numbers linked to Eric. In September 1992, Kevin's scanner detected the cell phone of FBI Special Agent Ken McGuire. He quickly cleaned up his apartment, ensuring there wasn't any evidence. On the morning of September 30, 1992, police knocked on his door. And he answered, naked. The agents were also not pleased to find a box of FBI donuts waiting for them. Although the FBI found no evidence, his close calls with authorities were escalating. When Kevin conned the Department of Motor Vehicles into handing him a copy of Eric Hines' driver's license, DMV investigators tracked him to a print shop where Kevin's grandmother had driven him. The investigators chased him through the shop where he barely escaped. All the while, his poor grandmother waited in the parking lot for 3 hours, wondering what had happened to her grandson. Kevin later reflected, "I never felt guilty about getting information I wasn't supposed to have. But when I thought about my grandmother, who had done so much for me and cared so much for me all my life, sitting there in her car for so long, waiting and anxious, I was filled with remorse." It was hard to leave his beloved grandma and mom, but he knew he had to go on the run. A warrant was out for his arrest for violating his probation by hacking and associating with other hackers. Kevin adopted a new identity, Eric Weiss, the real name of his hero, the magician Harry Houdini. He planned to do his own disappearing act. To solidify his persona, he infiltrated a credit reporting agency to find an Eric Weiss with good credit and around his age. Then he got help from Anne, his friendly contact at the Social Security Administration, to gather other personal details about Eric. He moved to Denver with his new identity, drawn by the allure of its natural beauty, and got a gig in the IT department of a prominent law firm, where he worked by day and hacked by night. The fun lay in hacking the world's largest tech companies with presumably the best security. He set his sights on obtaining the source code for one of Motorola's coolest phones, the Microtac Ultra Lite. He wanted to understand how the phone's software worked to try to change the ESN, just as he had done with his Novotel phone. Posing as Rick from Motorola's research and development team in Illinois, he got Alyssa on the phone, a stand-in for Pam, an assistant to a VP in R&D who was on vacation. He deceived Alyssa by saying that Pam was supposed to send him the source code for the Microtac Ultralight, but had directed him to Alyssa if she couldn't send it before her holiday. When Alyssa asked, "What version do you want?" Kevin had no clue what to ask for and said, "How about the latest and greatest?" Just like that, Alyssa handed him one of Motorola's most protected trade secrets. Though there was one little hiccup. Kevin had forgotten to acquire the compiler to translate the source code into machine-readable code. Still, it was a thrill. Next came Nokia. He posed as an engineer from Nokia USA in San Diego and contacted one of Nokia's offices in Finland, where a guy named Tapio transferred the source code for the Nokia 121 via FTP. Surprised by how easy that was, Kevin wondered if he could infiltrate Nokia's internal network to access more source codes and information on upcoming releases. He deceived Nokia England's IT department into giving him the login details to connect to its operating system, which he exploited to gain full system access and create a new user account for himself. Then he set his sights on a secretive digital phone under development, internally called the HD760. He contacted the lead developer, Marku, persuading him to share the latest source code. However, Nokia blocked outbound file transfers for security reasons, following alerts triggered when Kevin created his new account. Unfazed, he persuaded Marku to ship the source code via a tape drive to a Nokia office in Florida. His friend Louis would impersonate the senior vice president of Nokia USA to retrieve the tape, as it was too risky for Kevin to go. The package was arranged to be picked up at a Ramada Inn near the Nokia office, but the FBI had already been alerted. Kevin became suspicious when he called the hotel to confirm the pickup, and the receptionist seemed nervous and put him on hold for several minutes. Kevin called back later, pretending to be an FBI agent. "This is Special Agent Wilson with the FBI. Are you familiar with the situation on your premises?" The manager responded, "Of course I am. The police had the whole place under surveillance." It was time to leave and become someone else. He settled on Seattle because of its tech scene, Thai food, and good coffee. He adopted the identity of a baby who died, Brian Merrill, which he obtained by posing as a private investigator at South Dakota's State Registrar for Vital Statistics. He had to be extremely careful about hiding his real identity. The front page of the New York Times labeled him Cyberspace's Most Wanted. Kevin felt journalist John Markoff had wrongly turned him into a supervillain. The article was right about one thing: Kevin was eluding the FBI. Special Agent Kathleen Carson confirmed as much in a letter to a British computer expert Kevin had been in contact with. The letter read, in part, "I do not believe we will ever be able to find him